was an extraordinary man. I mean, about 500 years ago, art was revolutionized by Alberti, the famous Italian architect who revolutionized the idea of space in art. And what Matta did, I think, Matta to me is the great unknown, semi-unknown. Of course we all know about Matta if we're interested in art a little bit. But his importance is not remotely sufficiently recognized in my opinion. And the reason I say this, because Matta had this extraordinary idea of space. And I think this is recognized from the very, very beginning when André Breton saw him. He's also said that Matta sort of brought a new idea of space, about internal space, interior space, and exterior space. This weird idea that we exist in the universe, which if you think about it, even for 1 minute, the black hole, Matta tells you about the black hole too. He really looks into the far, far corners of the beyond, in a way that no artist, in my opinion, had done before. Of course, Picasso, great, great artist, of course, we don't need to say that, it's banal to say that. But Picasso invented Cubism, but even the kind of the Cubist idea still remains connected to Alberti, but Matta went far, far beyond that, because he kind of sees the black hole, but he sees also the craziness of life. These paintings are also full of wonderful humour. If you look at, that painting, Les Fumeurs over there, but which is this kind of crazy eroticism. He had also a crazy idea of the post-humanoid person, because I think, he lived through the history of the 20th century, he lived through the horrors of the 20th century, he was very aware of politics, he was very often depressed by politics, he was deeply affected by things like by the Holocaust and many other ghastlinesses that took place in the 20th century, and he kind of reflects them because he sees a human person as not really a human person. And at the same time, he also sees them with an incredible amount of love. So if you look at that wonderful painting, and it's, I would say, some people have said to me, oh, this is, he's quite a controversial artist, of course. And the other thing about Matta to me that is really important is that if he was a young artist today, if you walked into this gallery and being quite aware of, the contemporary art of today and the contemporary art market and all these things, you would say this is one of the most amazing young painters of the year 2020, practically. And he started his inventions back in the 1930s when he came from Chile. He was incredibly well educated. Can I tell you that I knew about Matta, first of all, from Robert Motherwell, long before I actually met him. The very first show that I did at the Royal Academy was of Robert Motherwell. A big, big show, big retrospective. And I remember Robert Motherwell told me that in the Second World War, of course, Matta came to Europe. He told me, and I sort of believe it, and I need to check it and do a little bit of archival work with the help of my dear friend Dawn Addies and others. He told me that he helped Picasso paint Guernica. That's to say, he helped him as an assistant, cutting out newspapers in the making of Guernica. So he knew everybody. Of course, we talk here about Duchamp, but he knew absolutely everybody in Paris. He obviously knew André Breton, who picked him up and declared he was actually the last officially declared surrealist, an official surrealist. He knew Duchamp, but as I said, he knew Picasso. He knew Magritte, who thought he was actually better than Miro. I mean, that's all, of course, a subjective opinion. We love Miro too, but Matta was an extraordinary painter. He certainly knew Tanguy, and you could see that in these paintings here. So he knew everybody. And then he, obviously, because of the war situation, like a lot of people, went to New York. But he spoke English perfectly. He'd spent a lot of time in London too in the 1930s. And of course, when we think of artists like Matta, we think of old men. And of course, I knew him as a relatively older person. But you must remember, the Matta in the 1930s was a very young man, a young kid, if you like. And I think these paintings, and he always retained this kind of sense of childlike. He was a very He was a very sophisticated man, incredibly well read, and he loved that extraordinary book called Locus Solus, you know. It was a fantastic kind of book of fantasy, as it were, fantastic stories, also taking place in, as it were, not in the fourth dimension, but perhaps in the fifth dimension. But again, if you look at that painting, which is a kind of the famous painting of Manet, the Déjeuner solaire, but and it also reminds me a little bit of Matisse's Joie de Vivre. It reminds me of Walter Disney. It reminds me of Acid. You know, it is an extraordinary kind of crazy figures. These crazy figures that look real, are totally real, but don't look real either. And they are of another, they project into a far, far future where one day we may all look like that. He kind of suggests that in that painting over there, which is called the painting about roses, but there are very few roses in that. It's about dictatorship. But it's a kind of funny painting as well. He's a very funny artist, and one of the things that this particular exhibition emphasizes is the humour of Matta. And he had a great sense of linguistic. He loved funny names because he spoke all these different languages. He spoke Italian, he spoke French, he spoke English, he spoke Spanish, and he loved fusing language and fusing meaning. I mean, what is that painting in the corner called? That very early painting?
Ironisme.
Ironisme. What do you think that means? Obviously, there's a sense of the erotic, but there's also the idea of ism, you know, this kind of weird idea that art, this kind of crazy idea that he has about the isms of art. And there are surely many, many other kind of meanings that we can put into words like that. And he senses in his work, you can sense electricity, you can sense the new science, you can sense space, you can sense, obviously there's a certain amount of science fiction in there, but it's not really science fiction. It's more the idea, I think, he kind of predicts even and depicts through images. It's very remarkable. The world that we now live in, you know, the world of the crazy cloud, where everything is there, and yet nothing is there. And you know, he's both a very profound, pessimistic artist, and he's also a happy artist. And I just think these paintings that we see here are absolutely wonderful, and you know, I can't in my head live without Matta. I think he's one of the key artists of the 20th century. Motherwell actually said to me, we were all invented. We, meaning Jackson Pollock, Achille Gorky in particular. It was when in the 1920s and 30s, was basically a bad imitator of Picasso. But somehow, through Matta, he became a great artist. The influence of Matta on Gorky is huge, but the influence on Jackson Pollock, on Clifford Still, there were these amazing seances, and that took place in these lofts of young. Again, I emphasize they were all young men. These people who were doing these things in New York, and they came to, and Matta was the one. André Breton didn't speak any English. Mondrian didn't speak any English. All the very famous artists who were incredibly expensive and legendary now, who went to New York to escape fascism. And I can imagine him as a young man really getting these people together and encouraging them to paint big pictures too. I can't imagine, obviously, the great Jackson Pollock's huge painting, the largest Jackson Pollock in the world. It was painted for Peggy Guggenheim, and nobody wanted this painting. And when she came back to Europe, the only people who would take it was Iowa State University, where this painting is now. And it's just painting totally in it is painting completely inspired by Matta, unthinkable without Matta. And the grip paintings are also unthinkable without Matta. And I remember once when Matta painted, he did a little portrait of me, about so big, and he took two pencils, and he closed his eyes, and that's like the seances that he used to have, and he went like this. My God, it looked like me. And I tell you why, because it had to do with the quality of his thinking. Just like Joseph Beuys said, art is visual thinking. His thinking, it comes through in these paintings, and if I were to be the lucky owner of one of these paintings, I would come down for breakfast every morning, and I would see new things every single day, and that to me is one of the great definitions of a painting. A great painting is a painting that you can sit, be glued to your seat forever and constantly be happy through it. Now, Dawn, what would you like to say about that?
Yeah. Yes, sorry, I won't keep you very long, and after Norman's peroration, there's a great deal to add in a sense, except that I think he's right to stress, A, that he is a great artist, B, that he is very contemporary, and C, that he's a great thinker. And that was a great surprise to me, was the amount of writing Matta did. Alice here tells me that every day after lunch, he would go and sit down with a notebook and fill it with ideas. And I've had the great privilege of being able to read some of these things, and they are absolutely fascinating. One of the things and of course the puns he talks about. Norman is right to say that he is an environmentalist before his time. He believed that Pan was dead, the great god Pan, and art was there to re-pan the world. But he plays with this because Pan also means bread in Spanish. And so he has this wonderful sort of game with the idea that bread, pan, is our daily life. Anyway, it goes on. And reading this writing was really fascinating. And I am just going to quote two very short aphorisms of his. Remember that he was trained as an architect.
I am an architect, not a painter.
He was an architect and not a painter. He was never trained as a painter. He was encouraged by his friend Gordon Onslow Ford in Paris to paint. And he said, well, I don't want to mess up your brushes or your clean brushes and so on. So he just squeezed some paint onto a corner of wood and started dabbing on the canvas and created his extraordinary colours. And he just basically taught himself through surrealism. But these two things, just very quickly, he said, painting always has one foot in architecture and one foot in dream. He also said, architecture has one foot in dream and the other in reality. So you can play with all those as much as you like, and it's very typical of the way that he writes. But I would hope that following on this, terrific exhibition, and the interest in Matta that I think it will actually encourage. We also, Matta. Of course he did. Yes, it was a wonderful pun at the time. I think we would like to be able to read more also of what he wrote. So he was an all-round person. Thank you.
He was a great man.
Thank you. It was a great surprise to me. I knew Matta, admired Duchamp. I knew that he had named paintings from the 1940s after the great glass, the bride stripped bare by her bachelor's even. The paintings were closely related to that. I had not realised how extensive the interest and the influence was. It was the idea of passage. Passage, the passage from the Virgin to the Bride. We've got the bride print there. But it struck Matta when he saw this painting, passage. Think about it, passage from the Virgin to the Bride. Come on, what is that all about? But Matta loved not just the eroticism, but also the idea that you might be able to paint something in transition, something that was actually changing from one state to another.
Which we all
psychologically, physiologically, physically, metaphysically. And that's, in a way, one of the keys to seeing these paintings.
Grazie.